Hi guys, this is Shelley Ram-Saban, CEO of Proactive Training Solutions. I'm here with Cassie Velez. She is our amazing social media expert at Allen Ram's Proactive Training Solutions, and has a bit of experience in the car business, working with us for a while, and also dating a car guy. She has both sides of the lens. Last month, our Facebook Live was focused on the service side and what the service experience was for myself. And Cassie had the, privilege of buying a car during the pandemic. And I wanted to get her on to talk about what her experience was like here as she kind of went looking for a car. And this was at the beginning of COVID, correct, Cassie?
Yep, it was back in March, the end of March, beginning of April.
Yeah, so right when everything really shut down, you had to buy a car?
Yeah, exactly. It was less than ideal, admittedly, but I am very frugal and I like to push things to the limit. And our car had been kind of giving us trouble for the past 6 months, but I was like, it'll be fine. We're fine, And it just got to the point where we were like, okay, we have to actually do this now. The car is like almost dead and we're a one car household, so we have to get a car at this point. And that was when everything sort of started to shut down, that we had just started looking. And again, being a one car household, we don't really have much of a choice. And I think a lot of people in the industry are wondering whether or not people still even are, in the market to buy cars right now. And there's definitely people in similar situations to me where you're just kind of forced to actually do it during this time. And there's also still going to be people who just want to, people whose leases are up or people who have had it for a while. And even though we're kind of going through this, especially if you're still employed, where they still have the means and the desire to actually still purchase a car, even with everything going on.
Yeah, and a lot of the OEM incentives are so good now. People just want a deal. I know people who just bought a car just to get, a great deal. So there's
Totally,
definitely
yeah.
Runs the gamut there.
Yeah, my dad was in the same predicament. He was like, he's like, there's just great deals right now, and I just want to get a new car. And he just did it because he wanted to purely. So I think it's kind of it's still motivating, the fact that people, even with everything going on, are still in the market in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now with flying less, people are probably driving a lot more too.
That's the other thing, is we've been doing that also, like just kind of to get out of the house a little bit. We just like to drive up. Living in San Diego, we have, we can drive by the beach or into the mountains and just kind of get out of the house for a little bit of time, roll the windows down and feel some of the sun and the breeze that we can inside, because we're all trapped inside right now. So I do think, especially right now, it's going to become more popular going on road trips. And I've seen people do 10, 12-hour like road trips to get to places because they still want to go on vacation, maybe someplace out in the desert or in the woods or something like that. And so they still want to take those trips, but they're afraid of flying right now. So I definitely think that we're going to see an uptick in that, especially, in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can imagine you put some research into, first of all, what car you wanted to buy, but besides that, what dealership to go to. So can you give me a little insight of what you did preparing to go into the car dealership?
Yeah, so we had reached out to a few different dealerships here in San Diego. For the most part, we had kind of narrowed down our search in terms of the types of car that we wanted. So we had just kind of searched around here to see which dealerships were, had something similar to what it is that we were looking for. And from there, we put out our inquiries. And the first thing that we were looking for during this process, as we started to go about trying to figure out, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, like we mentioned, so we didn't even know if dealerships were open at this point. I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of dealerships have is that they just assume that people know that they're open, and there's so many, it runs the gamut in terms of things that are open or closed, especially back then. But even now, some things are open but partially, or some places they're still open but their hours have shortened, or some places are just closed entirely. And I think we assume, working in our industries, that people just know that dealerships are open, or people just know that, restaurants are closed or something like that. And unless you're staying on top of these things because they're important to you, you're not going to necessarily know that. So even we started to look to see what dealerships had available, but the number one thing that we were looking for when we first started to do our research was, are these places even open at this point? Is this still a thing that we can do right now? It was, like I said, the end of March when we started to look for this. So the number one thing, and we can get into it. I have like three things that, I've really found like when I was looking and doing my research that were really important to me. And that kind of helped me to seal the deal with which dealership I was going to inevitably go with. And the first thing was that they clearly stated that they were open on their website and what their hours were. So again, I think it's one of those things where people just assume like, hey, they know we're open and that we're running business as usual for the most part. And again, that's not really the case. So I would say that if dealerships don't have that clearly stated on their website, or that's not one of the things that's like on their automated messaging when someone calls in, that's like the number one thing. I was like, I'm not even going to bother to waste my time with putting an inquiry if you're not open right now. Yeah.
So clearly stating them on the website. So that was your first place you looked, was online. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second thing that I really looked for when we were doing this research was like, how much of this process can I actually do before I'm coming in? Obviously, ideally, like a car is a physical experience, right? Like I want to see it. I want to make sure I love it in person. I want to drive it and see, how I experience the car, but that's not necessarily like we have to change this process with everything going on with COVID right now. So as much as I did really want to see it, and I still did end up doing that before we actually purchased, I wanted to do a majority of the process that I could prior to actually, going into the dealership. So that meant, getting all the information that I could, going back and forth and just understanding what this process would be, starting to work on some of the financials if I could, just all of those things. And the dealerships that I ultimately ended up reaching out to were the ones who allowed us to do a majority of that process online before actually coming into the showroom. And I know that that's a little bit difficult because even us at Allen Ram, we teach salespeople that you want to get them into the showroom. And that's so important because that's where you build that connection. And that's really what's going to, again, build that emotional experience for the customer. But unfortunately, we now have to shift those things because a lot of people don't feel comfortable going into the dealership.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you decide? So let's say you had, first they were open. That's step one, right? And then you called around, or you just looked online to see about the financial kind of what paperwork you could do. And then kind of what was your decision to where to go? Did you go to one dealership? Did you go to two? Did you have a short list?
Yeah, so we ended up narrowing it down to just two dealerships that we actually went to in person that had the vehicle that we wanted, that were willing to do a lot of this with us online. And then the third thing was, before we even bothered to go in, we were like, what are your procedures? What do you have in place right now in order to make sure that you're following like safety guidelines with COVID? And some dealerships, I think that especially at this point when everything was new, I think a lot of dealerships were trying to keep things as normal as possible, and that's not what we were looking for, right? Like I get it, I would love it if the world was normal right now. Unfortunately, it's not. What we were looking for was safety precautions. So the dealership that we ultimately went to had a few things in place. One, mandatory masks for customers and employees. Two, they set up their showroom properly with hand sanitizing stations everywhere. And then they also like propped open doors so that we didn't have to touch anything. And there were shields around the employees' desks. So that just kind of helped. Like there were so many layers throughout the entire showroom that we were like, okay, you're taking this seriously. And then three, they allowed us to go on solo test drives. So we gave them our license and they gave us a time limit, and then we were off on our own. There was one dealership before we were going to go in that sort of like insisted that they wanted to come with us, and that we were just like, I'm not going to be in an enclosed car with someone that I don't know right now who's seeing customers all day. Like, I'm just not going to do it. So those were the things that we were looking for. And luckily we were able to find two dealerships that we narrowed it down to that had what we wanted, that had these safety precautions in place. So we ended up going to two back to back in the same day.
I'm just curious. So when you found, like when you called around, did you see some dealerships really didn't have their processes together? Was that common, or was it like the exception or the norm?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were some that, like I said, that we were just like, ooh, like you might have had what we wanted, but at this point we couldn't really take the risk. So it was kind of juggling different things that we had anticipated during this car buying process, of course, but we had to ultimately prioritize what like safety measures you had in place. So I would say, again, there were three things that a few dealerships we were just like, absolutely not. We're not going to deal with that right now. One was just not mentioning COVID to us at all after reaching out, like just kind of pretending everything was 100% normal, like I mentioned before. And the reality of it is it's just not. So by not saying anything about the pandemic up front when you're talking with customers or what your dealership is doing to be safe, our only assumption could be that you weren't taking it seriously. It wasn't at the top of the list for you, and it was at this point for us. So that was the first thing I would say that they really just messed up on. The second thing was following up way too much and being too pushy. So this is already a problem with some salespeople, as we know. There's a fine line between like following up at a good cadence and just really pushing the customer too much and not seeing where they're currently at in the buying process. So I completely understand that there are less leads coming in right now, but it's important to not come across as desperate and harass the leads that you do have. So following up and letting prospects know that you're there to help, absolutely great, awesome. Following up multiple times a day through text, phone, and email when you haven't heard back from us yet is just not. Like, we are both luckily in a position where we're both working during this time still, so we don't have the luxury just to drop everything and, answer a call at all hours or just go to the dealership whenever we want to. So I would say continuing to follow up at the regular cadence that you were is so important right now. And again, customers
mention we do have a follow-up cadence resource on our training, because that is a problem, right? Knowing when to follow up via email, via text, via phone, and how to do that and balance that out properly so it isn't a burden.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would say just continue to stick with that. Like, it's gonna, again, I get that there are less leads coming in, but ultimately you still have to make sure that you're not pushing that customer into a decision that they're not ready to make just yet.
Yeah.
And so that was the second thing. The third thing I would say that dealerships did that sort of just turned us off during this whole process was I told you we ended up going to two different dealerships. And the first dealership that we went to, the salesperson there ended up at the beginning trying to shake our hands, which we kind of let go a little bit because we're like, okay, this is new for everyone. It's kind of like a natural, it's a habit. Exactly. It's a habit. So we were like, okay, we're not going to do that. Like, thanks, we'll wave, but we're not going to shake your hand. But then constantly when we were speaking with them, taking off their mask in order to speak with us. And again, I get it. Like, a lot, like, masks aren't the most comfortable thing to wear. But again, when you're doing something like that, that just shows me that you're not taking it seriously, which makes me again question the rest of like your safety precautions that you have in place. So even if as a salesperson, you're personally very relaxed when it comes to the current situation, I think it's just important to be mindful that a lot of your customers may not be, and put into place protocols that make them feel safe. In your last blog that you wrote about your service experience, you mentioned that it's important to appeal to the most conservative shoppers right now, the people who are taking this extremely seriously. And, if you appeal to those people, then the other people who are a little bit more lax on it, or the people who just really don't think that it's a huge deal, they'll still be okay. So it's important to appeal to that shopper and make sure that they feel safe. That way you're not pushing them away.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And they can still hear you through the mask. I know it's like, it's hard because you can't see a person's face, and you don't get a sense of like all the nuances, but it is like people can still hear you, and it's just, they're used to this at this point. It's kind of a respect thing, and it's like people are used to it, and they expect it in a lot of situations, especially inside.
Yeah, it's less than ideal. I get it. Like you just said, I love to see people's face when I'm talking with them, and it helps to build that connection with the salesperson. And that's so huge, is to have like that trust and that likability with the person that you're doing business with. But unfortunately, again, it's just, we all have to adapt during this time. And luckily, I think a lot of dealerships are realizing that. And obviously we're a few months into this, so things have drastically changed from where we were at the end of March, beginning of April, when I first started this experience. But yeah, I think it's still important to be mindful of the fact that there's still going to be people here who appreciate those safety precautions.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did touch on the safety, like those were some things that people were lacking. And then the good things were really taking it seriously. Anything else?
Yeah, that was it for the most part. I would say, like I said, the three things that I was really looking for with the dealership that we were going to work with was it is it clearly stated on your website that you're open? How much of the process can I do online before coming in? And what safety precautions do you have in place in person once we get there? And then the three things that I would say that they could improve on were not mentioning COVID to us at all after following up way too much and being too pushy because there was significantly less leads coming in at this point. And then three, just trying to shake our hand or taking off your mask when speaking with us. So those were the three things I would say at this point are really important to not to do, just to be safe and appeal to those conservative shoppers.
Absolutely. I agree. And, even now we're shutting down again a little bit, and it's not really sure, definitely making it kind of part of your website, part of your phone greeting, and just letting customer know where you are. So we've updated a lot of our resources to that effect, just to make sure that people know what they should be saying online, what they should be saying in voicemails, and really communicating. I mean, I think that this is really the point where communication is key with this, and over communicating and really letting people know that their safety is important. Because I think right now with my experiences with my friends, everything is like, oh, how was that? And oh, I felt really safe. I felt good. And, I even went to an acupuncturist and I was like, oh, I'm not going back there. But I went to another one and I was like, I like the way that she handled it. And so it's like, you look at what you feel safe. And so I think that that's a huge thing right now. It's like, that's the bar, I think, the standard that we should be following is how safe you're making people feel, how safe you're making your employees feel. We've had, dealerships in Atlanta that had to shut down because they just, they have an outbreak in the dealership. So it's really like, protecting your customers, your shoppers, and everything. So you can get this, so we can get this under control. We can continue doing our jobs, right? And go back to real normal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's everyone's goal. And what you just said is so important. Like, I'm looking for the businesses that people have reviewed recently where they felt safe. So I'm okay and kind of testing the boundaries with going to restaurants before they just close down again here in San Diego, making sure that they have, precautions in place and that they allow outdoor seating and that you have to wear masks and everything like that. So I'm testing those boundaries to see what I'm comfortable with. But I've been looking at reviews for people who are like, no, like they don't have anything in place. It was really like it was super crowded there or stuff like that. So we realize the importance of word of mouth in this industry specifically. Oh, yeah. Referrals are huge. Word of mouth is just so huge and social proof. And this is one of those things that have been added into that layer of word of mouth referrals now. It's how safe were they? So I think it's just important to highlight that now when you're working with customers, because this is something that they're going to transmit to their network.
Yeah, absolutely. Word of mouth is huge right now. It's that's where it is. People are leaving Facebook reviews, Google reviews. I mean, our Nextdoor site here has, they're definitely on top of the vigilance. So really just making sure you guys are in line. I think it's great advice. And I loved your blog. So Cassie wrote a blog for us this month on the website on her experience. So you can read more details on what she bought. What did you end up buying?
It was his decision. We bought a Subaru WRX.
Okay. It was not your choice.
I like to say that because it would not have been my choice, but it's his, so.
I see. All right, great. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to let our audience know that we're offering a free trial to just check out the content that we have. We have a lot of good COVID resources, scripts on what to say to clients, how to communicate. And so I'll leave a link in this description and would love to hear from you guys. So thank you, Cassie, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll be signing off now. Bye-bye.